Hello, and a massive welcome to Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiburg.
It's great to be here.
I am so glad you're here with us today. Whether you're commuting, walking the dog, or maybe just hiding in the pantry for 5 minutes apiece, we are absolutely thrilled to have you.
We really are.
Now, before we really get into it, and believe me, the topic we're unpacking today it's a heavy one. I just want to encourage everyone listening to follow and subscribe to the show wherever you get your audio.
It really helps us out.
It does. And just a quick heads up, because transparency is key in diplomacy, right? It is also possible to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcast. It's a small monthly fee.
And that support, it really helps keep the lights on here. You know, these research materials, the books, they aren't exactly free.
Not at all. So that small fee helps us keep the whole operation running, keeps us caffeinated, and most importantly, it gets you access to extra episodes. There's a link right in the description if you want to check that out.
Please do.
But let's turn our attention to the stack of notes on the desk today. Because looking at some of these titles, we've got Kierkegaard, Byung-Chul Han, data feudalism. I get the feeling we aren't just talking about trade agreements today.
No, not at all. We are talking about the architecture of reality itself.
That's a big claim.
It is, but I think it's justified. The central theme we're tackling is what some scholars are now calling the information regime. It sounds abstract, I know.
A little bit, yeah.
But it's really the water we are all swimming in. We're looking at how digital surveillance, big data, and this state of constant hyper-connectivity are reshaping not just our personal lives, but political autonomy itself.
And we're going to be looking at this through a really specific lens, aren't we? We're asking, how does this new digital reality affect political autonomy from a Danish perspective?
Exactly. And from there, how does that ripple out into diplomacy in general, and especially from a European standpoint? It's a huge topic.
It really is. I think when most people hear surveillance, they think of cameras on street corners.
Right. Or maybe the NSA listening to phone calls. That's the old model. But we are moving. I would argue we have already moved far beyond George Orwell's Big Brother.
We're in a new era.
We are in the era of big data.
Okay, Big Brother versus Big Data. Can you distinguish that for me? Because I think for the average person, it all just feels like being watched. What is the fundamental shift?
The fundamental shift is from coercion to freedom, or at least the feeling of freedom.
The illusion of freedom.
Precisely. The old model, the Orwellian one, was about, the boot stamping on a human face. Forever, you were watched, you knew you were watched, and you were afraid. It was a regime of no.
You can't do this. You can't say that.
You cannot go there. It was top-down, visible oppression, the classic totalitarian state.
Right.
But the model we are living in now, it is based on, yes, it's not forced upon us, we invite it in. The mechanism of control isn't pain. It's pleasure, it's convenience, it's connection.
So we aren't being forced to give up our secrets.
No, we're happily posting them.
We curate them. We brand them.
We polish them, we broadcast them. And to really understand this, to get to the bottom of why this is a crisis for diplomacy and not just, a problem for teenagers on TikTok, we aren't just going to look at tech journals.
No, we're going somewhere much older.
We are going to use the philosophy of Denmark's most famous thinker, Søren Kierkegaard, to understand why our modern digital life is a profound threat to being a real human being.
And by extension.
By extension, a real sovereign state.
I have to say, I love that we are bringing the Great Dane into a discussion about algorithms. It sounds like a bit of a stretch at first glance.
It seems like it, but looking at the material we have here, especially the analysis by the philosopher Hubert Dreyfus, it fits so perfectly, it's almost eerie.
So let's unpack this. We're starting with what we're calling the Danish lens.
Yes. Hubert L. Dreyfus was a brilliant philosopher at Berkeley, and he saw the connection between computers and Kierkegaard way, way before anyone else really did. He looked at Kierkegaard's critique of the press and the public back in the 19th century.
Okay, so obviously Kierkegaard didn't have Twitter, he didn't have smartphone, but he hated the newspapers of his day.
Oh, he detested them. With a passion. But we have to be really specific here. His critique wasn't just, journalism is bad or fake news.
It was deeper than that.
It was ontological. It was about what the press created. He argued that the press, this new technology of mass media, it conjured up a phantom, a monstrous abstraction he called the public.
The public. That sounds so innocent. I mean, we talk about public service, public health, public squares. Why was Kierkegaard so afraid of the public?
Because, he argued, the public doesn't actually exist. It's not real.
What do you mean?
Think about it. When you speak to a person, your neighbor, your friend, the person at the bakery, you are speaking to a specific, concrete individual. They have a name, a face, a history. If you insult them, there are consequences.
Right. They can get angry. They can confront you. It's tangible.
Exactly. If you make a promise to them, you are bound by it. There's responsibility. But when the press speaks, or when public opinion speaks, who exactly is speaking?
It's everyone and no one, all at the same time.
Precisely. It is a cloud, a ghost. Kierkegaard argued that this created what he called a leveling effect.
Leveling.
Yeah.
So flattening everything out.
Yes. In the public, everyone has an opinion on everything, but no one has any actual commitment to anything. It creates a state where you can be passionately interested in everything without ever having to risk yourself.
That sounds painfully familiar.
Doesn't it?
It sounds exactly like scrolling through a newsfeed.
Yeah.
You see a tragedy in a war zone, you click a sad face emoji, you scroll down, you see a cat video, you laugh, you scroll down again, see a political scandal, you leave a snarky comment.
And you feel like you've engaged with the world.
Yes. You feel informed, you feel like you've participated.
But you haven't actually done anything. You haven't moved from your chair. You haven't risked your reputation in a meaningful way. You haven't put your body on the line. That is the leveling. Everything is reduced to the same level of superficial engagement.
And Dreyfus connects this directly to the internet.
He says Kierkegaard predicted the internet age perfectly. Kierkegaard feared that this anonymity, this ability to be part of the public without being a specific, responsible person, would lead to a kind of nihilism.
Nihilism seems like a really strong word. We usually associate that with believing in nothing, with total despair.
Is it so strong, though? I mean, if nothing really matters enough to stake your life on or to make an unconditional commitment to, then does anything truly have meaning?
That's a fair point.
If everything is just content, a war, a recipe for banana bread, a diplomatic crisis, then everything is flattened onto the same level. It's all just stuff to be consumed.
So Dreyfus is saying that the internet just amplifies what Kierkegaard saw in the newspapers.
1,000 times over. In the 19th century, the press allowed for a lack of personal responsibility. Today, the internet, and what some thinkers call the swarm, makes that the default state of being. It creates this detached, superficial, almost ironic engagement with the world.
Okay, I want to dig into something Dreyfus talks about because I think it explains the psychology of this perfectly.
Right.
He brings up Kierkegaard's stages of life, the aesthetic and the religious.
Yes, this is absolutely central to the argument.
Can you lay that out for us? What's the aesthetic stage?
So, for Kierkegaard, the aesthetic sphere of existence is about being a spectator. It's the life of curiosity, of avoiding boredom at all costs, of keeping your options open. The aesthete tastes everything but commits to nothing. They're a connoisseur of experiences.
And the internet is the ultimate aesthetic machine.
It is the perfect engine for the aesthetic life. It is designed from the ground up to prevent boredom at all costs. The infinite scroll is the very mechanism of the aesthetic sphere. There's always something new, something different, something shiny to look at.
So you never have to choose.
You never have to make a choice that closes off other options. But to move to what Kierkegaard calls the religious stage, and we should be clear, he doesn't necessarily mean a specific organized church.
Right, it's more about a state of being.
It's a state of unconditional commitment to a person, to a cause, to a faith. To get there, you have to make a choice. You have to leap. You have to dare.
And you can't really dare in a comment section.
Not in the way he means it. You can be provocative, sure, you can be a troll, but that isn't daring because there is no real risk to the self. If the heat gets too hot, you delete the account. You close the browser tab.
You just walk away.
You walk away. True commitment, for Kierkegaard, requires that you cannot escape the consequences of your actions. It's binding. It defines who you are.
So let's bring this all together. From a Danish philosophical perspective, this digital life threatens political autonomy because it turns citizens into this phantom public.
Exactly. And this is where it hits the Danish context so hard. Think about what underpins Danish society. It's a society built on incredibly high levels of trust.
Yes, that's always the headline about Denmark.
And that trust is built through Foreningsliv associational life. People physically showing up to run the football club, the housing association, the local branch of a political party. It's about embodied presence and commitment.
It's tangible democracy. It's not abstract.
It's doing things together in the real world. But if those citizens are transformed into a phantom public, a collection of anonymous, non-committal spectators, what happens to that foundation?
It starts to crumble.
The state itself becomes hollow. You have a lot of noise, a lot of opinions flying around, but no real political will, no capacity for collective, risky action.
We become a gallery of onlookers watching our own democracy, just scrolling through the news of its decline, but never actually committing to saving it.
That's the Kierkegaardian fear. And this leads us directly into the work of a contemporary philosopher who takes this fear and shows us the precise machinery behind it.
And that would be Byung-Chul Han.
Yes, he calls it psychopolitics.
Psychopolitics. Now, this is a conscious shift from a term that many people might be familiar with, which is Michel Foucault's biopolitics, right?
Correct. And to really get Han, you have to understand who he is arguing with or building upon. Foucault, writing in the 20th century, analyzed the disciplinary society.
Okay, what did he mean by that?
This was the era of the factory, the prison, the hospital, the army barracks, the era of big, heavy institutions.
Where people were physically organized and controlled.
Right. In that era, Foucault argued, power was about controlling the body. You were told where to be, how to move, what to do with your hands. It was a regime of no, you cannot do this. You must stay here.
And the symbol of this was the panopticon.
Jeremy Bentham's prison design, yes. The guard sits in a central tower and can see into every cell, but the prisoners can't see the guard, so they have to behave as if they're being watched at all times.
Because they know they might be.
Yes, that's the disciplinary society. But Han's big argument is that we have moved past that. We are no longer in the disciplinary society. We are in the achievement society.
Okay. And in the achievement society, we've entered the era of psychopolitics. Power no longer needs to control the body from the outside because it now controls the mind from the inside. And how does it do that? If it's not the threat of the guard in the tower.
It doesn't do it through coercion or saying no. It does it through what Han calls smart power.
Which sounds a lot friendlier. Smart power sounds like something you'd want on your side.
And that is the trap. It's seductive. Han says the new neoliberal regime operates not by forbidding things, but by pleasing us. It doesn't say no. It says yes.
Like
share.
Boast.
Connect. Optimize. Achieve.
So we exploit ourselves. Is that the idea?
That is the central brutal paradox. We exploit ourselves willingly in the belief that we are realizing our potential. We think we are expressing our ultimate freedom when we post our lives on Instagram or share our location data for a more convenient app experience.
But we are actually just feeding the machine.
We are feeding the machine that monitors and controls us. We become our own panopticon.
Han uses a really powerful metaphor here, and it fits so well since we started with Kierkegaard. He calls the smartphone a digital confessional.
It is a brilliant, brilliant image. Think about the Catholic confessional. It's a small, private booth. You go in and you tell the priest your secrets, your sins, your deepest desires.
And through that act, power the church gains knowledge of your inner self.
Yes, but you do it willingly. You do it because you feel unburdened. You feel better afterwards. It's a form of release.
And today, the smartphone is the confessional, and it's also the rosary we carry with us everywhere.
Exactly. We are constantly confessing. We confess where we are via GPS. We confess what we want to buy via our search history. We confess who we love or hate via our social media activity. We are in a constant state of generating data about our innermost selves.
And this demand for constant transparency, this is what Han calls the violence of positivity.
Yes. That is a phrase that really sticks with you, isn't it?
It does, because usually we think of violence as negative, as destructive. A punch, a bomb, a wall being built, something that says no.
But an excess of light can blind you just as much as total darkness. Han argues that this relentless positivity, this excess of communication, this demand that everything be transparent and shared and liked, it destroys the secret. It destroys interiority.
And I can hear a listener asking right now, why do we need secrets? Isn't transparency a good thing? Shouldn't a democracy be transparent?
That is the modern reflex, and it's a powerful one. But Han's counterargument is that the secret, the hidden, the private, is necessary for inner autonomy. If you are totally transparent, if every thought and feeling is immediately expressed and shared, you have no interiority left.
You're just an interface.
You're just a node in the network, constantly reacting and transmitting. You have no space to develop a thought that is truly your own, that goes against the grain.
And what about politically? What does this do to the political realm?
Politically, you absolutely need secrecy for strategy. You cannot have diplomacy, which by its very nature requires discretion and careful negotiation in a world of total immediate transparency.
It's impossible.
If every tentative thought a diplomat has is tweeted, or every back-channel negotiation is live-streamed, the negotiation collapses instantly. It becomes pure theater. There's no room for nuance or compromise.
This brings it right back to the listener's daily life. I think everyone, on some level, feels this exhaustion. Han writes about the achievement subject.
The achievement subject is the person who is their own slave driver. In the old disciplinary society, the boss with the stopwatch forced you to work. In the achievement society, you force yourself to work. You're always optimizing.
Your workout, your diet, your career, your social media profile.
You want to be better, faster, more productive, more followed. You had a project to be managed, your own entrepreneur.
And the result of that is burnout.
Depression and burnout, Han says, are the signature ailments of this new era. They are not bacterial infections. They are what happens when the project of the self collapses under the immense weight of this self-exploitation.
So here's the crucial question for international relations, for diplomacy. If your citizens are a collection of burnt-out narcissists, obsessed with their own data and performance, how do you run a sovereign nation?
That is the million-dollar question. I mean, what does a nation-state even mean in that context? If we are all just exhausted self-exploiters, what happens to the people as a coherent political force?
Which leads us directly to another of Han's key concepts, the swarm.
This is absolutely vital for understanding why modern politics feels so chaotic and yet somehow so stagnant at the same time. We used to talk about the masses or the crowd.
Right.
In the 19th and 20th centuries, the mass was a physical thing. People gathering in a square, workers marching out of a factory.
They had a shared identity. They had a soul, a voice, a we.
Exactly. A we that could take coherent, directed action. They could storm the Bastille. They could go on general strike. They had a common direction and a shared narrative. Han argues that the digital swarm is fundamentally different.
How so?
It is a collection of isolated individuals.
Alone together.
Yes, that's the perfect phrase. They are all sitting alone in front of their screens. They are connected by hyperlinks and hashtags, but they have no soul. They cannot form a we. They can't march together in any meaningful way.
So what can they do?
All they can do is swarm. And the primary output of the swarm is what Han bluntly calls the shitstorm.
A technical term, I'm assuming, in his work?
In this context, yes, absolutely. It describes a very specific hydrodynamic of information and emotion online. A shitstorm is not political discourse. It is not a debate.
It's a discharge of effect.
Pure effect. Pure emotion, anger, outrage, mockery, indignation. It flares up instantly with no warning, makes an incredible amount of noise, can destroy a person's reputation in hours, and then it just vanishes as quickly as it came.
And Han's point is that this leaves the underlying power structures completely unchanged.
Precisely. It's a huge release of energy, but it has no structure, no strategy, no staying power. It just blows over like a digital squall. The system that produced the outrage remains untouched.
And this is where we really have to look at the implications for diplomacy and international relations, specifically for a country like Denmark.
Yes, because what is diplomacy at its core?
Its structure, its rules, its process.
Its structure, representation, and mediation. It is, by design, slow. It relies on representatives, diplomats, foreign ministers speaking on behalf of the people. But the digital swarm hates representation.
It wants directness. It wants immediacy. Why isn't the prime minister answering my tweet right now?
Exactly. It wants to tear down any intermediary. This destroys what Han and Nietzsche before him called the pathos of distance. The distance required for respect.
Respect.
How do you mean? The word respect comes from the Latin respicere, which means to look back at, to look at from a distance. You need a certain distance to see things clearly, to have respect for an office or for another person. When everything is immediate, when you can tweet abuse at a foreign leader or your own prime minister instantly while sitting on the toilet, that distance collapses.
So we are facing what you could call a crisis of representation.
We absolutely are. The digital medium itself suggests that we don't need intermediaries anymore. We don't need political parties or diplomats. We can just have instant referendums on everything online.
But Han says this is a dangerous illusion.
It's an illusion because what replaces the diplomat isn't direct democracy, it's just noise. It's the disorganized emotional chaos of the swarm. It renders the professional diplomat superfluous in the eyes of the public, but it offers no workable alternative.
And for a small state like Denmark, which relies so heavily on soft power, on its reputation, on careful, consistent diplomacy, this kind of volatility is incredibly dangerous.
It's a huge threat. If your foreign policy is suddenly being driven by the latest domestic shitstorm, the latest viral outrage, it becomes impossible to have a coherent long-term national strategy.
The state becomes purely reactive.
You're just constantly putting out fires that were started by the swarm instead of building the future you want. You are, in essence, dancing to the algorithm's tune, not your nation's.
This brings us to the actual structure that owns the swarm. We've talked a lot about the psychology of the user, the dynamics of the crowd, but what about the power of the platforms themselves? The outline calls this data feudalism.
This is the geopolitical reality that I think we're still struggling to grasp. We are used to thinking of international relations as being about states, Denmark, Germany, the US, China. But now we have new actors on the world stage.
The big tech companies.
UFA, as they're often called,
Yeah.
Google, Apple, Facebook, which is now Meta, and Amazon. And the argument, a very compelling one, is that they are acting like the new feudal lords.
Okay, unpack that analogy for me.
Well, think about classical feudalism. The lord owned the crucial resource, which was the land. The serfs lived on the land and worked the land. They got to keep some of the crop to survive, but the surplus value, the profit, went straight to the lord.
Right.
Now, what's the most valuable resource today? It's not land, it's data. In data feudalism, the platforms are the new land. We, the users, are the serfs. And here's the brilliant, diabolical twist.
What's that?
We work the land for free. Every time you post, every time you search, every time you like a photo, you are creating data. That data is the new crop. The lords, Google, meta-harvest it, refine it, and sell it for immense profit.
And we don't even get to keep a portion of the crop. We just get the privilege of staying on the land.
We get access, we get connection, we get dopamine hits, but we have no ownership, no rights to the value we create. And this creates a digital panopticon.
But it's different from Bentham's prison.
Very different. In Bentham's panopticon, the prisoners are isolated and forced to be there. In the digital panopticon, we help build the walls ourselves. We want to be seen. We tag our friends in photos. We check in at locations. We are participatory inmates.
So let's apply this directly to the idea of Danish sovereignty. If these digital fiefdoms, these American tech companies, control the flow of information, and if they control the psychopolitics of the Danish population, then where is the Danish state in all of this?
That is the crisis of sovereignty in the 21st century. If the public sphere, the place where Danish citizens are supposed to talk to each other about their shared future, is owned and operated by a private American corporation with its own commercial interests, does the Danish state truly have sovereignty over its own national dialogue?
It becomes a question of Danish law versus Silicon Valley algorithms.
Exactly. And the algorithms will always win because they move faster. Diplomacy is no longer just between Copenhagen and Washington or Copenhagen and Brussels. It is now, crucially, between the state and the platform.
This is why Denmark actually became the first country in the world to appoint a tech ambassador.
It was a groundbreaking move. I remember when it happened.
It was a formal acknowledgement that these companies act like nations, that Google requires diplomatic representation just as much as Germany or France does.
It was a necessary, if slightly desperate, move because the traditional nation-state is losing its ability to regulate the perpetuum mobile of digital capitalism. The algorithms change faster than Danish law can be written. They move faster than EU regulations can be implemented.
And a small tweak to an algorithm.
A small, unseen tweak to the newsfeed algorithm by a handful of engineers in California can shift the political sentiment of an entire population overnight, perhaps without even intending to.
That is genuinely terrifying. It's not just about spying anymore. It's about nudging and shaping behavior on a national, even global scale.
It is. And for a small nation like Denmark, that poses an existential threat. A massive nation like the US or China can at least try to build their own firewalls or regulate these companies because they are based there. But for Denmark, for much of Europe, we are essentially digital colonies of Silicon Valley.
So the new diplomatic mission becomes, how do we assert our sovereignty when the very ground beneath our feet, the digital ground, is owned by someone else?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this brings us right back from the geopolitical to the personal. How does living in this environment, this digital fiefdom, shape the very identity of the people trying to navigate it? The diplomat, the politician, the citizen.
And the source material we looked at presents two tropes for this, two ways our identity is being shaped. The digital neurotic and the digital psychotic.
Yes, these are strong terms, obviously, but they're used metaphorically to describe two dominant coping mechanisms. The digital neurotic is the anxious curator.
Okay.
This is the person, and you see this in public figures, diplomats, journalists, who is constantly, anxiously stitching together their online brand. They are terrified of being misunderstood, of saying the wrong thing.
They're constantly engaged in what's called audience design.
Yes, exactly. Is this tweet professional enough? Will this photo offend the left? Will that statement offend the right? Does this post look authentic but not too authentic? It is an exhausting, never-ending labor of constantly checking yourself against the perceived judgment of the swarm.
And the second type, the digital psychotic.
This is the next step. This is the instrumentalized self. This is when you stop checking yourself against your own internal values and you start tuning yourself entirely and exclusively to the algorithm. You simply become whatever gets engagement.
The algorithmic autobiography.
Exactly. Your life story is written not by you, but by the feedback loop of likes, shares, and comments. You see this in politicians who become absurd caricatures of themselves because they discover that outrage and extremism go viral.
So the self ceases to be a source of values and just becomes a project for consumption.
You are no longer a person with beliefs. You are a content creator optimizing for clicks.
This connects directly to Jean-Paul Sartre's idea of bad faith, doesn't it?
It's a perfect modern example. Sartre talked about the waiter who plays the role of a waiter a little too perfectly. He's so absorbed in the performance that he isn't being himself. He's just being what the customers expect him to be. He has become an object.
And in the digital age, we trade our substantive self, our actual private, complex values and beliefs, for a situational self. We become whatever the metrics say we should be in that moment.
And for a diplomat, for a national leader, that is fatal. Diplomacy requires a substantive self. It requires standing for something, for a set of national interests and values, even when it's unpopular.
But if our leaders are trapped in this constant validation-seeking loop, then policy becomes performative.
It becomes about the viral moment. The sick burn in the UN General Assembly, the perfectly crafted tweet, the flawless photo op. It's not about the slow, boring, difficult work of long-term strategy. You cannot negotiate a complex peace treaty if you're subconsciously worried about your Twitter engagement.
So we have painted a fairly bleak picture here. We have a phantom public, a burnt-out citizenry, a digital swarm instead of a people, feudal tech lords running the platforms, and our leaders trapped in algorithmic bad faith.
It's not a rosy picture.
Is there a way out? I mean, how do we even begin to reclaim political and personal autonomy in this environment?
There are thinkers who are proposing paths forward. One of the most practical is the idea of digital minimalism, which has been popularized by Cal Newport, but it has deeply philosophical roots.
And this isn't just about, deleting your Facebook app for a week, is it?
No, it's not a temporary detox. It is a coherent philosophy of less. It's about using technology deliberately and intentionally to support your deeply held values, rather than letting technology use you as a slot machine for validation and engagement.
Newport talks a lot about the importance of solitude, and I think his definition here is absolutely key.
It is. It's not the common definition. He defines solitude not as being physically alone, but as freedom from the inputs of other minds.
That is such a powerful way of putting it. So you could be alone in your room, but if you were scrolling through TikTok or listening to a podcast, ironically enough, you are not in solitude.
Not at all. You are flooded with the inputs of other minds. And Newport's argument, which echoes centuries of philosophy, is that without periods of true solitude, you cannot develop moral courage. You cannot develop original critical thinking. You are just processing the swarm's noise.
So for a diplomat, or for any citizen of a democracy, solitude is an essential resource.
It's a precondition for clear thought. You need to disconnect in order to think.
And Byung-Chul Han proposes an even more radical solution, which I absolutely love.
Yeah.
He calls for the return of the idiot.
Chuckles.
Yes.
But we have to be really careful with that word, of course.
Of course.
He doesn't mean a stupid person. He is going back to the original Greek root, idiches.
Which meant?
It meant a private person, someone who was not part of public life, not part of the polis, not part of the constant political noise. The idiot was the one who was in their own world.
And he also connects it to the Dostoevskian sense from the novel The Idiot.
Yes, Prince Mishkin. The character who is totally open, totally sincere, and totally distinct from the scheming, cynical society around him. Han argues that the idiot, in this philosophical sense, is the only one who has access to the other, to the truly new thought, the idea that doesn't just come from the network.
Why? Why does being an idiot, in this sense, help you think new thoughts?
Because the swarm, the network, is fundamentally a space of sameness. It's an echo chamber. It reinforces what everyone already thinks. Han points out that the word intelligence comes from the Latin interlegere, which means to choose between.
So intelligence is just picking from the existing options on the menu.
Exactly. But idiocy, in this philosophical sense, is the ability to step outside the network entirely, to disconnect from the menu, to create a completely new path. It's about not communicating.
So to bring it back to Denmark, for a small state to have true sovereignty in this hyper-connected world, maybe it needs to be a bit of an idiot.
In the best possible way, yes. It needs to have the courage to disconnect from the immediate global hysteria, to step back from the latest international shitstorm, and to think strategically and for the long term based on its own values.
This sounds a lot like what Nietzsche would call the pathos of distance.
It's the same idea, stepping back to gain perspective. True diplomacy, true statecraft requires that distance. You simply cannot navigate a complex geopolitical crisis if you are reacting emotionally to every notification on your phone. You need the silence to see the underlying structure of the problem.
That is a profound takeaway for our listeners. That in an age that worships hyperconnectivity, perhaps the most powerful political act is to strategically disconnect, to reclaim the time and the silence to actually think.
It is the only way to transition from being a project, that exhausted, self-optimizing, data-generating object, back to being a subject, a true human being who is capable of genuine political action.
We need to cultivate what has been called high-quality leisure. We need to stop seeing our downtime as just another opportunity to generate data for Google and start seeing it as the essential time we need to build and understand our own selves.
To save democracy, we might just need to allow ourselves to be bored for a while, to sit in a room alone without a phone and just think. That is the beginning of real autonomy.
So let's just briefly summarize the journey we've been on in this discussion. We started with Søren Kierkegaard's 19th century fear of the phantom public.
We move through Byung-Chul Han's analysis of the digital panopticon and the violence of positivity.
We looked at how the digital shitstorm has replaced diplomatic discourse, and we considered how our diplomats and leaders might be acting in algorithmic bad faith.
It's a journey, really, from the loss of the self in the network to the potential for reclaiming that self through disconnection.
And it leaves us with a massive and maybe uncomfortable final question for you, the listener. If algorithms are increasingly writing our autobiographies for us, if they are directing our political outrage, and if our so-called public square is actually a private feudal estate, are we citizens of a country anymore? Or are we just becoming livestock in a digital fiefdom?
It is a question that I think every free person needs to sit with and answer for themselves.
On that very provocative note, we're going to wrap things up. Thank you so much for joining us for this exploration on diplomacy and international relations by Bastian Freiburg.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this discussion, if it gave you something to think about, please take just a moment to rate the podcast 5 stars. It sounds like a small thing, but it really does help the show reach even more people who need to hear these kinds of conversations.
It makes a huge difference.
And don't forget to follow the podcast so you stay updated on all our future discussions. Until next time, stay curious and maybe put the phone down for a little bit.
Indeed. Goodbye.